Welcome to the third town hall of Many Threads, One Fabric, a partnership between NICET and the AFT to provide members with the information, experiences, and tools that examine and promote diversity in the union. Outraged by the headlines, efforts to stoke conflict and legitimize hate, bigotry, and racism, the union joined the community to lift our voices. Some of us endorse candidates. We energize members, neighbors, and the community to vote. We knocked on doors, fund banked, volunteered as lawyers, poll monitors, and canvassers. Now what? How does our union sustain its efforts to make our voices heard? How do we advance our vision for racial, social, economic, immigrant, and worker justice? Thank you for joining us for this lively discussion about next steps for using our power to make a lasting difference. And now, it's showtime. Hold on as I turn over this town hall to our facilitator, Leslie Baskerville, President and CEO of NAFEO. Leslie?
Thank you so very much, Vice President Abraham. And I certainly want to extend a heartfelt word of appreciation to AFT President Randy Weingarten. And I'd like to also thank the New York State Union of Teachers President Andy Pallotta for their leadership and support of this tremendous undertaking. I'd like to support all of those who are part of the AF team who have supported this effort, and there's so many people, but I especially want to thank Cheryl Tier, Delisa Sanders, and Very Peterson. No better associations are there than the American Federation of Teachers and the New York State United Teachers to host this discussion, because as you know, so much of what drove so many people to the polls were the COVID-19 that brought to the forefront the entrenched and intractable health disparities. It brought to the forefront the racial and ethnic disparities in not only healthcare, but in education, economics, wealth, healthcare, sustainability, and injustice. It brought to the fore the particular hardships on frontline workers and on those who are in the teaching profession from pre-K all the way up to and including graduate and professional schools. So many of the issues that the American Federation of Teachers and the New York State United Teachers are grappling with, and all of the AFT affiliates are grappling with, were what drove this election and drove record numbers of people to come to the polls. This year, the Americans voted in tremendous numbers, the largest turnout ever, amid the nation's greatest health pandemic since the 1918 influenza epidemic. And it was at a time when 1 in 6 Americans were confronted by food insecurity. 1 in 4 of our children were suffering from food insecurity. So many things were going on. The unemployment rates were going up. More people than ever were filing first-time cases for unemployment. But because of the caring of Americans for those who are last, least, and locked out, and because of their concerns about not only what would happen to them and their family, but what would happen to American democracy, people showed up in record numbers. I'll share with you just a few data points. So with regard to the Native Americans, for example, they made the margin of victory in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Montana. The Navajo Nation, which is the largest Indian nation in America, delivered to President-elect Biden the vote by 10,500 votes. President-elect Biden received 70% of the votes of Latinos nationwide that helped to deliver victories in key states, but it also laid the foundation for noting the importance of the Latino electorate for future elections as well. As regarding Asian Americans, 61% of the Asian American Pacific Islander voters backed Biden, as compared with 34% who supported President Donald Trump. And among Black voters, who make up 11% of the national electorate, 9 in 10 voters supported Biden. Black voters provided Biden 87% of the Black vote overall. President Trump received 12%. 93% of Black female voters voted for Biden-Harris, helping to deliver President Biden to the presidency, but importantly, also delivering to the White House. The first female, the first African-American female, the first HBCU alumna, a bison, and delivering the strongest numbers of diverse voters to a more hopeful position. No better discussants are there than the people we have assembled this afternoon to talk with you about the election is now over. And people of color, the coalition of people of color came together and pushed America to a point of reset. We're at a position where we can reset, where we can get back on course to try and realize the egalitarian ideal and to move forward with democracy. We have assembled today Ms. Cindy Benavides, who's the League of United American, who represents the League of United Latin American Citizens. We have Diana Carnier, National Indian Education Association, Frederick Ingram from the American Federation of Teachers, Kent Wong, Director of UCLA at the Center, and Vice President for the California Federation of Teachers. So to get us started, I'd like to ask each one of you, starting with Mr. Wong, to tell us what was it that motivated such a large percentage of your stakeholders to go out and vote? And then share with us just a couple of things that you did that resulted in the tremendous outcome that we had.
Good afternoon, Leslie. Great to see all of you, and a special warm welcome to our sisters and brothers in the American Federation of Teachers. Today I'm wearing two hats, one as a vice president of the California Federation of Teachers, the California affiliate of the AFT, but I was also the founding president of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, the first national organization of Asian American union members and workers in the country. And so let us be clear that the November 3rd, 2020 election was a victory not only for the labor movement, but for communities of color. And it was a multiracial effort that brought together African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, that together scored a decisive victory for the Biden-Harris ticket, the largest turnout in US history. And so we collectively need to celebrate this victory, but we also need to build on what this means for the future of this country in terms of moving towards a multiracial democracy and a country that embraces racial and economic justice. Labor turned out in record numbers across the country, and especially in critical battleground states such as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Labor played a decisive role working in partnership with communities of color to flip the states that led to an electoral victory, not a voting victory, an electoral victory for Donald Trump. And let us be clear that the Electoral College system is a throwback from slavery. So let us be clear that it is highly undemocratic and privileges white conservative voters over the rest of us. So we think that the particular role of mobilizing communities of color in the November 2020 election was decisive, and that communities of color were highly motivated, especially given the 4 years of the white supremacist, racist, anti-immigrant, misogynist, anti-women, anti-LGBT programs and policies advanced by the Trump administration. This is a new day, this is a new era, and this is a time that we need to move forward as a country to rebuild our democracy.
Thank you so very much. Ms. Knoyer, the Native American community was decisive in so many of the critical states. Please share with us your answer to the same question. What was it that you did as a community, as nations, to come together and deliver the Native American vote? And what will that mean going forward?
Thank you, Leslie. Yes, as NIA, since we are just focused on education, we had to partner with and depend on the strength of our what we call sister organizations, the National Congress of the American Indian, and our regional organizations out in our communities. So we didn't just offer the basis or foundation of what education needs to look like and how to change it, but we also provided the support in partnership with our other organizations. And having Navajo Nation as, unfortunately, as the health spokesperson for COVID and our viruses, our tribal nations in North and South Dakota that have to continue to fight with their state governors to keep their people safe, that actually helped our numbers. It helped our communities realize that they needed to get out and vote. So unfortunately, this virus really pushed our people to go to the polls and have their voice be heard for, like Ken said, one of the first times in history.
Thank you so very much. Ms. Benavides, please share with us what the richly diverse Hispanic community did and what has positioned them going forward so that people will be certain that they will be key decision makers and also a central part of both the coalition of people of color, but pivotal to the outcome of elections in the foreseeable future.
Leslie, thank you so much for that question. And again, Cindy Benavides, and I serve as the CEO of the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, and LULAC is the oldest and largest national Latino civil rights organization in the country. As we think of the Latino community, it's so important that we understand the numbers. And currently, Latinos are 60 million strong. And in just 30 years, Latinos will be close to 130 million. What that means in context is that close to 1 in 3 Americans will be of Latino ancestry. And when we look at the GDP, the Latino GDP in America is 24.4% of total US GDP growth. What that means is the Latinos absolutely are the future of America and will continue to be the future of America. When we look at November 3rd and the elections, I think Kent hit it on the nail. This really was a collective effort from all of our communities in turning out to vote for a candidate that represents the values of our communities. Whether it was Arizona or Nevada or Michigan or Pennsylvania, we know that it took all of us working in tandem to make sure that we elected candidates that represent us. And we're surely keeping an eye on Georgia and being very much involved in what happens in Georgia and making sure that Latinos turn out to vote in that key state as we head into January. What a lot of individuals don't know, Leslie, is that every 30 seconds, a Latino in the US is turning 18. Every 30 seconds. And what that means is that every single year we have close to 1 million additional Latino voters who are eligible to register to vote simply for turning 18 or voting age. And so there's a massive opportunity in making sure that Latinos are involved, that our political candidates, political institutions reach out early on to Latino organizers, to the Latino community, to get them engaged and involved. And today we find ourselves really holding now accountable the Biden-Harris transition team and making sure that there's at least 5 Latino cabinet members, or 20% of the cabinet is of Latino origin. We saw the representation of Aline Mayorkas, now secretary, nominated for DHS, and certainly we hope to see additional Latinos nominated. So we're extremely proud of that, Leslie. But what I would say is that 2020 is a historical year in many aspects. Not only is our community suffering because of the pandemic, but certainly I think this election highlighted the power of the people, the power that our collectiveness, being united, can do in turning around a country.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And to close out the first question, I'd like to call on Secretary Treasurer Ingram.
Unmute. Okay, can you hear me?
Hey, okay, good, good.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Leslie. And I want to thank NYSET, Andy Pilata and Felipe Abraham and your entire team for having this courageous conversation, because this is a courageous conversation, one that needs to happen. And so I believe your question was what motivated our members to get out and vote. And I have to book in.
And then give us some examples of the types of things they did as well.
Absolutely. So let me bookend my answer by telling you where we started with Randy Weingarten, our president, Evelyn DeJesus, our vice president, and our former secretary treasurer, Loretta Johnson, Dr. Loretta Johnson. They started town hall meetings all over this country in the primaries because we wanted our members to be really close to these candidates so that they understood our values, they understood what we needed, where we were coming from, and so that we got a chance to know them. And so that's where the first real work started in this election process for us. Our members came out in droves. Before this was pre-COVID, where we would come out to town hall meetings, to rallies, to events, to sittings that we met with all of these candidates, and they had to explain themselves to people who work in pre-K and healthcare and public service that we represent. And so I think that's where we started. And then I'll tell you where we ended as a national organization. We finished a 32-day bus tour. And this was in the middle of COVID. The beginning of October, we started, and we ended, we started in Los Angeles, California. We went 15 states, again, led by Randy Weingarten, our president, all the way, and we ended in Miami, Florida, in November, on November 2nd with Souls to the Polls. And so with that, we were able to bring people out once again in the social distance way, making sure that we adhere to all the protocols of the healthcare scene, and making sure that our members understood what the value system was of not only the AFT, but what needed to happen for America. And so I will tell you this, what drove our members first and foremost is this existential threat, which is not a man, which is not the president, which is not 45. He is not the existential threat. He has exacerbated what we know as the existential threat. One is COVID, and we've got to get this virus under control. Two, public education. That's what drove our members, because we always want our classrooms to be better. We want our profession to be better. The wealth gap is something that we hold dear to us, with Latinos and African Americans and to our Asian Pacific Islanders, making sure that we can close this wealth gap. The criminal justice system drove our members out. And let me be clear, America has to have a reckoning with racism and racial disparities. We've seen it not only all summer, but we've seen it for decades. And we've got to plant the flag where our young people were out all summer long, in the streets, in rallies, in protests, and we've got to continue that effort. And I want to thank them, all of those young people who went out to the polls, because in that 80 million people who voted for Joe Biden, who voted for change, who voted for something that we could get out, and now we've got to do something about that. And lastly, our neighborhood investments. Our neighborhood investments include our healthcare reform, economic development, and again, criminal justice reform. So those are the things that drove our folks. Those are some of the things that we did. So many people, 1.7 million members, people did everything, and it's all important that we continue those efforts. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in other questions. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So yes, now that we heard some about the demographics of the coalition of people of color. We've heard some about some of the strategies and interventions and what they yielded in the communities that we're discussing this afternoon. So now that we have heard about those types of things, it's important for us to turn to how do we move? How do we keep alive the energy and the affirmative actions that so many engaged in to bring out record numbers of voters, more than ever participated in the election for the President of the United States and Vice President of the United States? How do we keep that alive? How do we move from the streets to legislative suites and position local, state, and congressional electors, legislators, to move the protest into policies that will improve the life for all persons, but most especially those who've been locked out, left behind, and marginalized disproportionately, people of color, working people, small businesses, and others. How do we get to that point? And so let's see, Kent, why don't you start us up again with your sense of the answer to that question?
First and foremost, Georgia is on our minds, and
Georgia's
we must
on
do everything that we can to ensure a Democratic victory in both the state of Georgia and in the US Senate. It would be a disaster to have a Republican domination for 4 more years in the US Senate. So we really call on anyone who can to assist with the mobilization in Georgia. Secondly,
can you sing Georgia on our mind? If you do that, I'm sure you will pump up the volume and get more voters out.
Maybe on another call, we'll work up our vocal cords. But the spirit is there in terms of Georgia on our minds. The second thing, which other speakers have addressed, is that first and foremost, we need to address the COVID-19 crisis that Trump has so thoroughly mismanaged COVID-19, lying to the American people, completely unable to show an iota of empathy towards the more than 250,000 Americans who have died in large part because of his incompetence and his narcissism. And so let's be clear that we must first and foremost unite the country to oppose the pandemic, and that we have to be very thoughtful that communities of color are suffering disproportionately, both in terms of the virus and in the mortality rates, but also are disproportionately represented among essential workers who are on the front lines every day to keep this country moving. And all the while, we have billionaires who are making billions profiting off the pandemic. And so there is something very wrong when we have billionaires who are making profits as workers are suffering and dying. And so we call on the Biden-Harris administration to step it up to ensure that workers are being protected, that PPEs are being readily available, and that we have a national mobilization that will ensure the type of testing and tracing that we need to eliminate the pandemic and to quickly move forward with the vaccine as soon as it is available.
Okay, so Diana, what is it that we must do now to capture the energy, to capture the affirmative actions, and move the people from the streets to impacting legislators in the suites so that we can move from protest to policy?
I do want to echo what Kent had to say about mobilizing, like taking advantage right now. And I think where that happens is the transition team, really taking advantage of Biden, Harris, their team of people wanting to hear for the first 100 days, what do you want us to do? And so being very proactive, coming with your concise list of needs for NIA that is, infrastructure, that is creating and establishing better communications between the Department of Interior and the U.S. Department of Education. That is talking about bringing back the civil rights department and division within the Department of Education. With the civil rights funding cut, with the staff cut, a lot of our tribal communities, our tribally controlled schools, and our bureau operated schools lost a direct connection to having equitable education services. They felt like no one was caring and no one was listening. Our healthcare system, I think that, like Kent said, we need to be addressing COVID more immediately. That's why we came out and started voting. That's why Navajo Nation came out in droves, rode horses, drove people around, tried to social distance, because our healthcare systems, especially for our Native people or our minority people, were being pushed aside. I think you talked about the TikTok and call to action. I think it's time we took our voices to the street. Now it's time to take these voices and be more diplomatic but aggressive to this transition team. And that's what we plan to do.
Thank you. Diana.
I just spoke.
Did you did speak? I'm
Yes.
sorry, you just spoke. Wrong name. Okay. Cindy.
No worries, Leslie. And, like I echo the sentiments of Diana and Kent. And, what I would say is that the work starts now, and it really started on election day. And, for the Latino community, Leslie, a community that has been invisible, along with other communities of color, is making sure that the transition team understands that we are asking and demanding that at least 20% of the cabinet be of Latino origin. And again, LULAC was the organization that during the campaign months, we were really, throwing up our hands and asking, why are Latinos not represented? And unfortunately, what we see every election cycle is the last minute effort to engage our communities. And this is not only to the Latino community. I know that, this happens across communities of color. And certainly, now with the transition team, LULAC has been working really closely in terms of sending in our letters, talking with different members of the transition team to make sure that we're sending in viable candidates, as well as listing out the issues that are important to us. And the truth is that issues like healthcare and education and immigration are very important. I will also tell you that why we're so honed in on the issue of representation, it's because we want to make sure that the communities and constituencies that elected this current president-elect and our Vice President Harris-elect, that they be represented. And we have the saying in the millennial world, nothing about us without us, and we can't be what we can't see. And so it's really making sure that we are not silent, that we are blowing the horn, raising our arms, putting in the media, putting in social media, that we absolutely want to see ourselves represented at all levels. And I would say also that, we have to keep our eyes on all fronts. The truth is that right now in Congress, there's also key decisions being made in terms of who will be taking on the chairmanships of key committees that have an extreme amount of power and influence in terms of legislation that's so important to so many of our communities. And I would just say that as we look towards the future, Leslie, part of what LULAC does, we have something called the We Run National Campaign Training Institute, which is completely nonpartisan, is making sure that there's more Latinos and more communities of color that are running at a younger age, that we are considering these positions of elected office as careers. And, something that I always bring up is that I grew up in a household where my parents absolutely never told me, we dream of you when you grow up being an elected official or a politician. That's something that absolutely did not happen in my household. But I think that as we lead into the future, there is an opportunity for all of our communities to be represented in elected office, whether it's at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level. And also not to forget the appointments that can be made on boards and commissions that also impact not only our education system, but so many of our policies across the board, including technology, which has proven to be one of those issues that is impacting all of us on so many different fronts.
Fantastic. Cedric, I'm asking you to close us out again. Let's hear your perspective, please.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to give you three issues that people can turn their attention to right now. One is we need a stimulus package for our country, period, point blank. People are hurting. This pandemic, we talk about healthcare, we talk about schools, we talk about the need to have an economic advancement for folks. This country is in dire straits. We are on the edge, not in Wall Street, but in Main Street and on your street. These are the people who we're talking about. We have to call out Mitch McConnell and the Republican senators and insist, push, cajole, whatever we have to do to get them to agree to a stimulus package. Nancy Pelosi and the House have had the HEROES Act for months on the table, $3 trillion. That money is needed right now in small businesses, people who work every day, 8 to 5 jobs, people who have been impacted and affected by COVID-19, either loss of jobs or underemployed, our hotel workers, our entertainers. our people who are education staff professionals, those secretaries and bus drivers and hardworking paraprofessionals, those people who are just trying to make it doing God's work. We need a stimulus package, and we need it for this country, and we need it now. So what can you do to keep this moving? You can call Mitch McConnell, call these Republican senators, and tell them that they need a stimulus package that needs to be done by the holiday. And so we need that. Number two is we just put out another blueprint for America for opening our schools and keeping our schools safe. We've been talking about how we open our schools. We're going into the second semester in January. We cannot have a lost year for these students, for these kids across this country, especially our Black and brown children and our Asian Pacific Islanders. We cannot have a lost year. And so we can put together protocols. Randy Weingarten wrote an op-ed for the Hill editorial about a couple days ago. And I would encourage everybody to go to the AFT Facebook page or go to our Twitter and get this blueprint for opening schools. And we call it opening schools simply because we're going to reopen schools again in January, and we're going to go in with scared teachers. We're going to go in with scared parents. We're going to go in with students who continually get impacted by this coronavirus, people who have been on hybrid learning, people who've been on distance learning. We know that the best learning in our public schools is a face-to-face teacher and a student, and the magic that happens between that relationship. And so those protocols is get this virus under control. Our public health protocols need to be adhered to everywhere in the country. We need a national blueprint. We need a national blueprint. And so that's the last thing that I'll talk about. This state by state, city by city, town by town, county by county strategy of piecemealing our issues together is not fair to the American people. Let us put together a national protocol that says we're going to have masks, that we're going to have social distancing, and we're going to do better as a country to get everybody better. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much. And I want to add to your appeal the desperate need for Congress to pass a continuing resolution so that the nation does not face the prospect of running out of funds altogether. Let me just pick up on I want to show the difference between the approach that AFT is advancing and what I think I heard LULAC doing. So with AFT, you talked about a blueprint for America. You talked about a stimulus package that would bring together and support and make sure that all Americans had adequate food and clothing and health care and those things that are central to success. You then talked about a blueprint for opening the schools for all persons. And finally, you ended up talking about the need for a national approach, not a piecemeal approach. When LULAC responded, I heard a discussion about a percentage of jobs, a percentage of people in the administration and so forth, and focusing on the Hispanic community. The question that I have that grows from that is, in terms of an approach, can we realize what we need to do, which is to bring the nation together, and then particularly to bring persons together, not only persons of color, but working people and people of goodwill who want to see America coming together, no longer being torn apart, coming together and not being beaten over the head. They want to see the end of the horrific discrimination that we see, of the actions that we see, violent actions on the rise in the streets resulting from executive actions. How can we bring people to, how best can we bring them together? Do we succeed if we have the Latino community saying we're going to get 20% of everything because we are 20% of the populations, and then African Americans say, well, we're 11% and we want 11%? Or do we need to somehow respect our rich diversities and the things that we bring to the table, but talk about how do we make sure that, one, everyone has a seat at the table, and that we are working in concert to make sure that those of least advantage, those who are struggling, left behind, locked out, and in the margins, can be brought up into the middle sector and beyond, but importantly, how do we help to put the America back on course to realize its egalitarian ideal? And those things that are the cornerstones of what makes America great.
Oh, thank you for that, Leslie. And what I would tell you is that it's important that we don't fall into the trap of a division or a divisive narrative. The truth is that so many of our Latino organizations are working hand in hand with multiple ethnic organizations. And, you know, sometimes that what a lot of folks forget is that within the ethnic group of Hispanic, we have multiple races. And that we have a rich diversity. It's funny because I do a lot of commentary around understanding our Latino community. And gosh, after 20 years of speaking on the Latino community, it seems like our journalists and so many others finally caught up in terms of just how diverse our community is. And the truth is that we, you know, for the first time started seeing, you know, the diversity in terms of our religion, in terms of our country of origin, in terms of our gender, generation, how long we've lived in the US, or what state we lived in. And so as we look at America, I mean, first and foremost, it's protecting our democracy and making sure that our country continues to move forward. And Leslie, you know, when I talk about the Latino community as a Latino organization, it's because for so long, Latinos have been left behind. When you have you know, a population that's 18% of the total US population will be 30% in just 30 years, but yet represent less than 2% of board members on corporate boards. And when you start looking at elected officials, you know, we're really focused on the issue of representation. That, however, does not mean that we are not keeping sight on all the issues that impact our community. And I will tell you that during COVID-19, what has become absolutely clear is how disenfranchised our communities of color are. The fact is that today there are Latino families who have to decide if they're going to purchase flour, tortillas, and beans versus being able to purchase laundry detergent because they are unemployed. There are children who are not able to go to school because they don't have the access to technology and they don't have the broadband. And I think it's really thinking strategically at the intersections of all of our issues in terms of moving forward. You know, for 4 years, we've seen the divisive tactics of trying to divide our communities, and divided, we absolutely fall. So as we look towards the future, it's absolutely putting a front that is united and making sure that we prioritize our issues. I know that we're looking at a national Black and Brown agenda to make sure that we're addressing these issues collectively.
Thank you so much. And Diana, what do the Native Americans think? I'm reminded, as we are just in the aftermath of Thanksgiving, that the natives in America have not received an ethnic reckoning, though these many years. And as so many people were celebrating Thanksgiving, many natives were having a national day of mourning and calling on ethnic reconciliation. How do you think we can achieve that, Diana? How can we respect the atrocities visited upon so many of the groups that we're discussing and others, but recognize that we'll be stronger, more potent, and achieve together? And then how do we facilitate that togetherness?
Thank you. Well, as the only political entity, we have a racial, we're ethnic, we're labeled peoples of color, but Native communities are actually the only political entity with a government-to-government relationship in the United States. That has not existed following the federal trust responsibility, following all of our treaties for the last 4 years. So what can we do? Yes, Black and Brown, the coalition, we want to be a part of that. But actually, the most important thing that this administration can do is bringing back the tribal relations meetings. There used to be a White House tribal relations meeting that took place annually. Every tribal leader, president, governor, chief was invited to the White House, and they had a meeting. Every government, president, CEO, tribal leader, chief, and the president of the United States would meet every year to discuss topics, to discuss issues. That hasn't happened for 4 years. This administration has dismissed the nation-to-nation relationship, dismissed the fact that you have 576 individual nations, individual cultures, individual languages, individual practices and traditions. So this administration could do a lot by bringing that back, hosting that annually, hosting it not just annually, but having quarterly, but also involving tribal nations in conversations that are that affect our health, our economy. Because of COVID, all of our economic development in our tribes are gone. Tourism, casinos. So not just our workers on our reservations that are suffering because they don't go to work or can't leave the reservation because of quarantine, but we don't have any infrastructure now of our nations because we're isolated and we're rural and we depend on people, disposable incomes. So I don't want to say we're worse off than anyone else, but we have additional concerns and additional needs and unique needs that we actually have to depend on this federal government for. And we can't right now, we just can't. So we're having to take care of each other and support ourselves, support our own brothers and sisters. But this is the opportunity and it's exciting. It's an exciting time to look across outside of our native nations and look at our African-American and our Hispanic and Asian brothers and sisters and say, please help us. Let us come to the table and let us share our thought and philosophy. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Did everybody who wanted to weigh in on that question weigh in? So
can I get in?
absolutely. Is that Frederick? Yes.
Yeah, so I'll briefly say this, and I think this will help to weave the very color of America. So Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are president and vice president because of a place called South Carolina, because of a Black man named James Clyburn, because of a young lady who whispered in James Clyburn's ear, because of an army of Black women who said, we're gonna take a stand and we're gonna move this country forward. Guided by, right behind that, Black men, guided by Hispanics in South Carolina, guided by 60% of the rural population in South Carolina. Then you expand that electorate into our indigenous folks who are like-minded, who want better for America, and you expand that into Asian Pacific Islanders who want better and want to move our country forward. And this unique fabric of America that we're trying to weave together, all said at 80 million people, including some of our white brothers and sisters, a lot of our white brothers and sisters that we cannot forget, who understand the need and the value to work together, to come together and to be together as a country, so that we can all bring our children together, we can have a better healthcare system. This is about all of us. This is about a reckoning of the American ideal, that we can make this country better for every zip code, for every child, for every family, and that nobody should be left behind. This is supposedly the richest country in the world. We ought to act like it with our value system to healthcare and public education and our public service workers and the things that we need. And we ought to attend to the least of these. That's those people who do those menial jobs. We oftentimes talk about the doctors and the nurses, and they are essentially important, but there are people who change the sheets every day. There are people who empty the trash in COVID stations in our hospitals. There are people who are valeting cars. There are people who are doing the work that we sometimes and often dismiss and forget. And so it's the value system of all of us that is going to bring all of us forward, because there's no reason that anybody in any zip code in this country, rural, urban, on the East Coast, the West Coast, in the Beltway, doesn't matter. You should be able to achieve the best of yourself through our schools, through our healthcare, and all of us should be able to reap those benefits. And hopefully with this administration, we can continue to put the pressure on, and we will all be better for it.
Thank you so very much. So we are so much on time. I'm going to throw in one question before we go to the TikTok final question. I want to find out from each one of you, we've heard about the importance of addressing COVID, and absolutely everybody's in agreement on that. We talked about having to have a stimulus package. I threw in there that we must have a continuing resolution so that we have a budget. Some other people talked about a few other things, but will you tell me quickly, each one of you, what is your first three? What are the first three matters that legislators must address? And secondly, what are the three things that you need from your colleagues, the stakeholder groups represented here today, that would help us to achieve that? Anybody can go first. Kent, you want to go?
Fundamentally, the challenges facing our nation, or how do we heal from 4 years of hatred, 4 years of division, 4 years of lies? And we need to envision a multiracial democracy that can unite the people of this country together around values that honor and that cherish the worth and dignity of every human being. And so fundamentally, we need to ground a multiracial democracy based on economic and racial justice. And
interrupt her just for a moment, because I really want to get the three things that I asked for, and you may be answering it, but it's not clear to me. The question is, what are the three things that you think we need most from legislators? And then look to your colleagues and say, the three things that I need most from your stakeholders group so we can achieve it are.
Well, fundamentally, we've raised two, that absolutely we need a national mobilization to address the COVID-19 crisis. We need to have an equitable economic recovery that affirms the fundamental role of communities of color, of working class people at the center of that recovery, so that it is not being hijacked by billionaires who are continuing to profit off the pandemic. And we need to advance a racial justice agenda. We have been inspired by the movement for Black Lives that has not only lifted up the hopes and aspirations of African Americans, it has lifted up the hopes and aspirations of all communities of color and all people of conscience. So what we need from each other is we need to make sure that we continue to organize, that we continue to work together, and that we continue to fight for a better future grounded in our common values.
Thank you so much. Diana, the same question.
Well, outside of education, obviously, I want to focus on healthcare. I want to focus on, my concern is this vaccine, the rollout of the vaccine. Who's going to get access to this? Our rural and isolated communities, and I'm going to just use the Navajo Nation, since that's what's in the minds of everybody and on the news. Still a high rate of positive cases. So it's getting access to infrastructure for our healthcare. That's the first piece. The second piece is this, it's a space of education, educating about equity issues within the education system. And what had this pandemic shown us? It's peeled back these layers of inadequacies. It's peeled back layers of lack of access for Native people, not just Native students in rural areas, but also in our urban areas. And it's not just Native students that don't have access to the internet. It's all of our children, all of our minority or low income children that don't have access. So equitable access, healthcare. And the third piece is a powerful voice. Everyone has talked about the percentage of their population that showed up to vote. We're 1%. The 1% of this whole population. We have the smallest vote. We have the smallest voice. That's my third ask, is include us in your fight, include us in your advocacy. But to include us, you got to invite us to the table. You've got to listen to our needs, our issues. You got to have the community solution where we are providing the solution for what our communities need. We are too small of a population, and we don't get that respect that that I wish we would get. Thank you.
But you were large enough to deliver Arizona to President-elect Biden by 10,500 votes. Thank you so much. All right, Cindy.
Thank you for that question, Leslie, and Diana, count us in. Absolutely. I just text Cesar Moreno. I was like, please send me Diana's email ASAP. And just shout out to AFTM for the invitation. I really enjoyed this discussion. You know, I would say, Leslie, the very first issue is a COVID-19 stimulus package that includes not only testing and vaccines and being very cognizant that our essential workers absolutely have to be top of mind, but also a package that includes a stimulus for our economy and small businesses and all of our families who are experiencing unemployment. You know, there's so many individuals and families that are facing hard decisions, and we're seeing the moratoriums of mortgages and of rent that is coming up, and how many people are self-evicting at this moment, and what that means for our youngsters, for our students. So COVID-19 is absolutely top of mind. I would say the second one for us, Leslie, is immigration. It is long overdue. We want to make sure that we see not only executive orders in the first 100 days, but that this Congress really focuses on that long-term solution that we've been waiting for decades now. And then lastly, I would say fund our public schools. For so long, we've seen funding being taken out of our public schools. And this goes back to Mendes versus Westminster and Brown versus Board. There has been a very intentional and strategic I would say options and solutions that have taken place since then that has taken money out of our public schools. So making sure that we are funding our public schools is actually top priority of mine for us. And what I would say for our stakeholders, our allies and partners is safety. And I think that there's no greater voices than our teachers to continue to drum up the voice, to continue to drum up the beat and the issue of safety in our schools. And Frederick said it correctly. I think it's such a major issue that impacts our teachers, our administrators, our students, our parents. It's so multi-layered. So continuing to beat the drum on that, I think, is critically important. Second, I would say mental health. You know, so many of Americans are experiencing anxiety, depression, and so many other mental health issues. And I'm just thinking of our youngsters and our students and their parents and our teachers and what this means, not only for the next few months, but for the next few years. And lastly, I would say that it's so important that as we look towards the future, as we look towards an equitable America, that we continue to question the institutions that are in place, the systemic racism that still exists, that impacts so many of us, and that we really think outside of the box. And, you know, let me just give you a clear example. Back in the 50s and 60s, a LULAC member came together with a university professor to create something called the Little School of the 400, which was to teach our Mexican children in Texas 400 English words. Congressman Johnson becomes President Johnson and takes this model and creates Head Start. And so, you know, what teacher and what university president is going to come together again to create the next model that will impact millions and millions and millions of children for the next 30 generations, or the next 30 years rather. So Leslie, thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to run to get the 30 seconds in there, but Frederick, did you want to weigh in? And then we'll shift immediately to the TikTok 30-second question and close out.
Sure, I'll be really quick. I'll just reiterate the same points that some other people have, and I need a stimulus plan. Number two, a national blueprint for our schools to keep them safe and to ensure equity and excellence, academic excellence. Number three, the protocols for healthcare need to be adhered to nationally. New York has led the way. You saw just today, California instituted a statewide mandate on many different healthcare protocols. And then what I need from Cindy and Diana and Kent is to keep your foot on the gas, to make sure that we do not let up. The pressure needs to be there. Two, don't get distracted. In the next 48 days, you're gonna hear all kinds of stuff about pardons, about he's leaving the White House, he's not, about what is happening, who's going into the cabinet, who's not. Don't get distracted. Stay with the truth of your values. And then three, bring those young people who are in the street. We heard Black Lives Matter, but there's so many other civic and social factors out there that people are marching for. We've had the Women's March out there. We've had LGBTQ marches over the last 4 years. We've got to bring that energy to this new administration. And I'm reminded of a meeting that Martin Luther King had with Lyndon B. Johnson in the White House. He said, Lyndon B. Johnson said to MLK, I understand your values, I understand your issues. Now, Dr. King, I need you to go out and make me do it. And MLK said, I understand it. And that's when you saw the freedom rides. That's when you saw the boycotts. That's when you saw those actionable things that actually made the Congress and the White House sign those bills of 65 and 66 that we had those reforms. So those are the things that we need. Keep the pressure on and don't get distracted.
Thank you so very much. And to each one of our tremendous panelists this afternoon, you've provided us with a great deal of information. And importantly, we began to see priorities that are overlapping and pretty much in alignment. We've got to close out quickly. And I want each one of you to look into the camera, and I want you to share with those who are listening what we do next. What is your call to action? Now that the coalition of people of color came together to save democracy, to give America an opportunity for a reboot, what do we need to do immediately to make sure that we can position us to perhaps be the first multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy in the world? Anybody, each one of you gets to say. Look, you're looking at me immediately, so why don't you go ahead and start, Frederick?
Sure. I will reiterate one point. We need a stimulus package. This is a dark winter. It's going to be a dark spring. People are not going to survive this, both physically and literally. We have 2,500 Americans dying a day from the coronavirus. We have a Congress that has not enacted itself in over 6 months. This is going to get worse. We are losing our justices that are connected to our economic freedoms. When we're working, we're not making enough. The rents are due. Student loans are coming back as of the end of December. If they don't act, people will be evicted from their homes in the middle of winter. We need a stimulus package that is going to help states not go bankrupt. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Yes, help is on the way. Yes, the vaccine is on the way. Yes, we're putting some things in place. But the next 2 weeks, people are dying. And Mitch McConnell needs to hear from you. The Republican senators around this country need to hear, see, and feel you, the people, because this is about we, the people. I'm urging you to call our Republican senators and Mitch McConnell. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Cindy, 30 seconds, call to action.
No, Leslie, I will start with we can't be what we can't see, and making sure that we are taking a step back ourselves and analyzing our own communities, our own school systems, and who is represented and not represented. Making sure that we have more teachers, more counselors, more principals, more superintendents that reflect the diversity of our communities is very, very important. And then making sure that we are keeping our eyes on the long term. The truth is that we don't need a Band-Aid on issues that need long-term solutions. We need sustainable solutions. And again, the voices that our teachers and that so many AFT members carry, it's so important that our members of Congress and this Biden-Harris transition team hear those voices. And I will tell you, I am doing everything within my power to make sure that the Latino voice, specifically as a Latino civil rights organization, is heard. And so, making sure, Leslie, that we understand, take that step back to analyze, and making sure that we also understand our history, right? The truth is that before Texas was Texas, it was Texas. And before New Mexico was New Mexico, it was Nuevo Mexico. And Colorado was Colorado. And so making sure we understand that deep history that we have in America and the contributions that we've had since the beginning is very important.
Thank you so much, Diana.
Yeah, mine is just a statement. Get ready to empower your voice, rewrite your history, decolonize and reconcile your nations.
Thank you so very much. And Kent, won't you close us out?
Georgia is still on my mind, and it better be on your mind, because the road to victory in the Senate is through Georgia. So let us mobilize and secure that victory. Let us all work together and continue to organize for a better future. Let us carry on the spirit of John Lewis. Let us carry on the spirit of so many who have gone before us to pave the way for a multiracial democracy that is in our grasp, that it represents the hopes and aspirations of millions of people across this country. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to end as I began by thanking AFT and NYSUT for hosting this tremendous dialogue today. I'd also like to close by calling on my ancestors and saying Ubuntu to my brothers and sisters. I am because you are because I am. We are interdependent and interconnected, and we must come together as one richly diverse, pluralistic people to make sure that we use our strengths, our salsa, our soul, and our spirit to move the nation forward. I thank you for affording me the opportunity of moderating this discussion, and I'd like to turn over to Felipe.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would like to thank the panel, Sandy, Diana, Fred, Kent, for a wonderful, lively discussion. I also want to thank Randy and Andy for allowing this partnership to take hold and actually continue. And I also want to thank a few people who have been essential in getting this project off the ground as well. Mr. Saunders, Dr. Saunders, thank you very much. Cheryl Tier, V. Peterson, Cesar Moreno Perez, and from my side, Brian Thomas and James Morrison for the assistance with this project. Once again, thank you. And it has been a pleasure, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And by the way, this recording will be available on demand on the website, nysut.org/manythreads. Thank you very much, and a good evening to all.